Earl Thompson carried his military past in silence, another forgotten black veteran shuffling through Millfield streets, invisible to everyone who mattered. The waitress at Maggie's place didn't even pretend to hide her disgust when he asked for water, just water, while deciding if he could afford breakfast. Shelby Morgan brought him a glass of filth, murky and streaked with grime, announcing loudly enough for the whole diner to hear that he shouldn't chip his teeth on the dirt. The police officers laughed. The regulars looked away. But in that moment of cruel triumph, Shelby had no idea she'd just served the wrong man. A decorated colonel with sealed federal files, a phone full of FBI contacts, and 3 months of recorded evidence that would destroy everything. Within 24 hours, her diner would be shut down, cops would be arrested, and a conspiracy reaching all the way to the state legislature would begin to unravel. All because she thought dignity was something you could wash away with dirty water. The autumn morning carried a bite that cut through Earl Thompson's thin blanket like it wasn't even there. His eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim light filtering through the high windows of the shelter. Around him, other cots creaked as their occupants stirred, but Earl moved with practiced silence, sitting up and swinging his legs over the side of the B-74. His body protested the cold more than it used to, but his movements remained precise, deliberate. He reached beneath his cot and pulled out a small duffel bag, weathered and patched in places. From it, he extracted a faded army jacket, olive green turned gray by time and countless washings. He held it for a moment, running his thumb over a spot where insignia used to rest, then folded it with military precision and placed it back in the bag. Earl dressed methodically in his worn but clean clothes. A pair of khaki pants with a careful crease he'd pressed using the shelter's ancient iron, a navy blue shirt missing its third button, and scuffed brown shoes he'd polished the night before until they held a ghost of their former shine. He ran a hand over his close-cropped gray hair, grabbed his duffel, and headed for the door. The walk to Main Street took him past the elementary school where children were already gathering in the playground, their bright jackets like scattered leaves against the morning gray. A few parents glanced his way, some with pity, others with suspicion, but Earl kept his eyes forward, his gait steady despite the slight limp that cold weather always brought out. Main Street was coming alive. As he approached, the hardware store owner, Tom Bradley, was rolling out his sidewalk display of rakes and leaf bags. The florist next door arranged chrysanthemums in her window. And there, occupying the prime corner spot it had claimed for 43 years, sat Maggie's place. The diner's neon sign flickered between open and pen, its red letters fighting a losing battle against the morning sun. Through the large windows, Earl could see the breakfast rush was already in full swing. Steam rose from the coffee machine, and the cook's spatula flashed as he worked the griddle. The smell of bacon and hash browns drifted out each time the door opened, making Earl's empty stomach tighten that he paused at the window, watching the familiar dance of small-town morning ritual. The booth seats were filled with locals, the ones who belonged. Jim Harrison, the bank manager, sat in the corner booth he'd claimed every morning for 15 years, newspaper spread before him like a map of the world. The Fitzgerald brothers, who ran the auto shop, occupied the booth by the door, their coveralls already marked with the day's first oil stains. And there, at the counter, sat 2 uniformed police officers, their backs to the window, shoulders broad with authority. Earl knew the rules. Locals got booths. Regulars got the counter. Everyone else, outsiders, strangers, those who didn't quite fit, they got whatever was left, usually the wobbly table by the bathroom that nobody wanted. He pushed open the door, and a bell chimed overhead. The conversation didn't exactly stop, but it stuttered, like a record skipping. Eyes flicked toward him, cataloging his appearance in that quick, brutal arithmetic of small-town judgment. Old, black, shabby clothes, probably homeless. Not one of us. The hostess, a young woman named Brittany with blonde hair piled high and too much makeup for 7 in the morning, looked up from her phone. Her smile faltered when she saw him, recovering into something professional but cold. "Table for one?" she asked, already reaching for a menu from the stack reserved for single diners, the laminated ones with corners peeling and coffee stains that wouldn't come out. "Actually," Earl said, his voice soft but clear, "I'd just like a glass." Of water while I decide if I'm staying for breakfast. If that's all right. Brittany's eyes narrowed slightly. Water meant no tip. Water meant taking up space without paying. But the diner wasn't full, and she couldn't exactly refuse. Sure, she said, the word clipped. Have a seat at the counter. Earl nodded his thanks and made his way to an empty stool, setting his duffel carefully at his feet. The two cops glanced at him, one nudging the other with his elbow. Earl pretended not to notice, studying the menu Brittany had reluctantly handed him. Shelby, Brittany called toward the kitchen. Water at the counter. Shelby Morgan emerged from behind the coffee station, and Earl recognized her immediately. She'd been working at Maggie's for years, her bottle blonde hair and sharp features a fixture of the place. She was the type who knew everyone's business and made sure everyone knew she knew it. Her eyes landed on Earl, and her red lips twisted into something between a smile and a sneer. Water, she repeated, loud enough for half the diner to hear. Just water. She made a show of walking to the back, past the water pitcher on the counter, past the stack of clean glasses. The two cops chuckled, and one of them, Officer Mike Brennan, according to his nameplate, said something under his breath that made his partner, Officer Tony Russo, laugh harder. Earl kept his eyes on the menu. Eggs and toast, $4.99. Pancakes, $6.99. Coffee, $2.50. He had $8 and change in his pocket, saved from odd jobs and aluminum can returns. Enough for a meal, but then nothing for tomorrow. The water would have to do. From her training position behind the counter, Maya Williams watched the scene unfold with growing discomfort. She was new, only 3 weeks into the job, still learning the rhythm of the place. 23 years old with natural hair, she kept pulled back in a neat bun. She'd taken the job out of desperation when her mother's medical bills started piling up. She didn't like the way Shelby treated certain customers, but she needed this job too much to say anything. Shelby returned from the kitchen carrying a glass, and Maya's stomach dropped. Even from where she stood, she could see the glass was wrong. Cloudy water with visible specks floating in it. The glass itself streaked with grime like it had been pulled from the dirty dish bin. Shelby walked with exaggerated purpose, her heels clicking on the linoleum floor. The diner had grown quieter, people watching without appearing to watch. She reached Earl and plunked the glass down in front of him hard enough that water sloshed over the rim. Careful, Shelby said, her voice carrying across the diner. Don't chip your teeth on the dirt. The laughter came in waves. First the cops, loud and unrestrained. Then a few nervous chuckles from other patrons, the kind that came from discomfort, rather than amusement. Jim Harrison rattled his newspaper, a sign of disapproval, but said nothing. Earl looked down at the glass. The water was murky, with what looked like coffee grounds floating on top and a film of grease creating rainbow swirls on the surface. The glass itself had fingerprints and what might have been dried egg yolk on the rim that he didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't give Shelby the satisfaction of seeing hurt or anger cross his face. He simply stared at the glass with the kind of 1,000-yard stare that had seen worse things than dirty water. What? Shelby continued, emboldened by the laughter and his silence. Thought we'd give you the VIP treatment? This ain't the Ritz, honey. Maya couldn't stand it anymore. While Shelby basked. In her moment, Maya quietly grabbed a clean napkin from the dispenser and moved down the counter. She slipped it next to Earl's elbow, leaning in just enough to whisper, "I'm sorry." Earl's eyes met hers for a brief moment. They were brown, flecked with gold, and held a depth that made Maya think of still water that ran deeper than it appeared. He gave her the slightest nod, then turned back to the glass. With deliberate calm, Earl pushed the dirty glass away, sliding it across the counter until it came to rest against the napkin holder. He looked up at Shelby, and when he spoke, his voice was steady and clear enough for everyone to hear. Sometimes the filth's not in the glass. The words landed like a stone in still water, ripples of discomfort spreading through the diner. Someone coughed. A fork scraped against a plate. Officer Brennan's face reddened, and he half stood from his stool before Russo grabbed his arm. A Shelby's smile froze, then shattered into something ugly. You got something to say, old man? Earl stood slowly, reaching for his duffel bag. No, ma'am. I believe I've said enough. He turned to Maya. Thank you for your kindness, young lady. He walked toward the door with the same steady gait he'd entered with, back straight, head high. Behind him, Shelby's voice followed like a thrown knife. Guess we'll see him digging through the dumpster in the alley next time. Some people just don't know when they're not wanted. The bell chimed as Earl exited, and conversation slowly resumed, but the atmosphere had changed. Maya stood frozen, still holding the coffee pot she'd grabbed as cover for approaching Earl. She watched through the window as he paused at the corner, pulled out an old flip phone, the kind nobody used anymore, and dialed a number. Who was that? Maya asked Marcus, the cook who'd been watching through the service window. Marcus, a heavy-set man in his 50s with arms covered in burns from years of working kitchens, shrugged. Earl Thompson. Been around town maybe 5, 6 years. Stays at the shelter mostly. That's it. Marcus glanced at Shelby, who was now regaling the cops with an exaggerated version of what just happened, making Earl sound confused and pathetic. He lowered his voice. Heard he served in Vietnam. Navy maybe? Or Army. I don't know. Then something happened, and he made a vague gesture. You know how it is. War messes people up. Maya nodded, but something didn't sit right. The way Earl had carried himself, the way he'd spoken, that wasn't a broken man. That was someone with discipline, control. Someone who chose his battles. Carefully. Outside, Earl stood at the corner of Main and 3rd, the flip phone pressed to his ear. The contact name on the tiny screen read, Major D. Danielson. Came the crisp voice on the other end. It's Thompson, Earl said, his voice different. Now, harder, more authoritative. We need to talk. Problem. Earl looked back at the diner, where Shelby was visible through the window, still playing to her audience. Not a problem. An opportunity. The rot's worse than we thought, and it's not just in the department. How much worse? Enough that we might need to accelerate our timeline. Can you meet tonight? Same place. 2100 hours. Copy that, Colonel. Earl closed the phone and slipped it back into his pocket. He adjusted his duffel bag on his shoulder and began walking toward the library. The morning was still young, and he had preparations to make. Back in the kitchen of Maggie's place, Shelby was in her element. The morning rush had slowed to a trickle, giving her an audience of staff for her performance. She stood by the dish pit, one hand on her hip, the other holding the dirty glass like a trophy. You should have seen his face, she cackled, dumping the murky water down the drain with a flourish. Like he expected champagne or something. These people, I swear. They come in here, taking up space, driving away real customers. Danny, the 19-year-old busboy with acne and ambitions of saving enough to leave town, laughed nervously. He needed this job to pay for community college, and Shelby had the owner's ear. That was harsh, Shelby, he said, trying to sound supportive while his conscience squirmed. Harsh. Shelby spun on him. Harsh is having to smell him every time he walks by. Harsh is watching property values drop because these people hang around Main Street. Officer Brennan had wandered back to lean against the kitchen doorway, his utility belt creaking with the movement. About time someone put him in his place. We've been getting complaints about him, making people uncomfortable. Complaints from who? Maya asked before she could stop herself. Everyone turned to look at her. Shelby's eyes narrowed dangerously. From concerned citizens, Russo said, joining his partner. People who actually contribute to this town. He wasn't bothering anyone. Maya said quietly, but firmly. He just wanted water. And he got it, Shelby snapped. Maybe not the fancy bottled stuff he was probably hoping to get for free, but he got what he paid for. Nothing. The cops laughed again, and Brennan added, You're new here, right? Give it a few months. You'll understand how things work. Maya bit her tongue and turned back to wiping down the counter, but her mind was made up. She'd heard Marcus mention Earl spend his afternoons at the library. She had a break at 2 o'clock. The library was a different world from the diner. Quiet. Organized. With tall windows that let in streams of dusty light. Maya found Earl in the back corner, surrounded by a fortress of history books. He was reading a thick volume on military strategy, making notes in a small notebook with handwriting so precise it looked like printed text. Mr. Thompson, she said softly. He looked up, and she saw surprise flicker across his features before, settling back into calm observation. Miss Williams. Maya, isn't it? She nodded, impressed he'd remembered her name from her name tag. I wanted to apologize. Properly. What Shelby did was wrong. You have nothing to apologize for, Earl said, marking his place in the book and giving her his full attention. You showed kindness when it was hardest to be kind. That takes courage. Maya shifted uncomfortably. I should have done more. Said something. And lost your job. Earl shook his head. You have responsibilities. I saw you last week at the pharmacy. Picking up prescriptions. Expensive ones. Your mother? Maya's eyes widened. How did you? I noticed things, Earl said simply. It's a habit. Is she ill? Lupus, Maya admitted, sinking into the chair across from him. The medications we're managing. That's why you work at the diner, despite how they treat you there. It wasn't a question. Maya nodded, then looked at the books spread across his table. What are you reading? History. Strategy. Old habits. He closed the notebook. Tell me, Miss Williams, what do you want to do? When your mother is better, when you're not tied to that diner? The question caught her off guard. Nobody had asked her about her dreams in so long, she'd almost forgotten she had them. I wanted to be a teacher. Elementary school. I was 2 semesters away from my degree when Mom got sick. You'll go back, Earl said with such certainty that Maya almost believed him. I don't know. It's been 3 years now. The credits might not even transfer. They will. And you'll be a better teacher for having lived through hardship. Empathy can't be taught in a classroom. Before Maya could respond, the library door opened and 2 men in dark suits entered. They moved with purpose, scanning the room until they spotted Earl. Maya started to stand, but Earl placed a gentle hand on her wrist. Stay, he said quietly. There's nothing to fear. The men approached, and Maya noticed several things at once. Their suits were expensive, perfectly tailored. They wore small pins on their lapels, American flags with something else she couldn't quite make out. And when they reached the table, they stood at a subtle form of attention. Colonel Thompson, the taller one said, his voice respectful but urgent. We need to speak with you. Colonel? Maya's eyes widened, but Earl's expression remained neutral. Gentlemen, this is Miss Williams. Maya, these are associates of mine from Washington. The men nodded politely to Maya, but their focus remained on Earl. Sir, there have been developments. The incident this morning was expected, Earl finished, and documented. We'll discuss it tonight with Major Danielson. Sir, with respect, the timeline remains unchanged. Earl's voice carried an authority that made both men straighten further. Thank you for your concern, gentlemen. It was a dismissal, politely delivered but unmistakable. The men exchanged glances, nodded, and departed as quickly as they'd arrived. Maya stared at Earl. Colonel. Earl sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 74 years. A lifetime ago, Miss Williams. Now I'm just Earl. But those men are trying to right some old wrongs. Sometimes the past has a way of reaching into the present, demanding justice. He stood, gathering his books. You should get back to work. Shelby will notice if you're late. Maya stood too, her mind spinning with questions. As she reached the door, she turned back. Mr. Thompson, Earl, who are you really? He smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. Someone who served his country, made enemies of powerful people for doing the right thing, and is tired of running from shadows. Be careful, Miss Williams. Your kindness today has been noticed, and not just by me. The warning in his words was clear. Maya hurried back to the diner, where she found Shelby waiting with arms crossed and fury in her eyes. Where were you? Shelby demanded. Break. I had 15 minutes. You were seen at the library. Talking to him. Shelby stepped closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. Listen carefully, little girl. You don't know how things work here. That man is trouble. He's a drifter, probably crazy, definitely dangerous. You stay away from him, or people will start thinking you're one of them. One of them, Maya repeated, her voice steady despite her racing heart. You know what I mean. Don't play dumb. This is a nice town, a safe town, and we keep it that way by knowing who belongs and who doesn't. Earl Thompson doesn't belong. And if you're smart, you'll remember which side you're on. That evening, Officers Brennan and Russo sat in their patrol car, laptop open between them, running Earl Thompson's name through every database they could access. Most came back with basic information. Age, no criminal record, honorable discharge. From the Army. But one database, restricted to law enforcement, showed something different. File sealed, Brennan read, frowning. Requires federal authorization to access. Since when does some homeless vet have sealed files? Russo asked. Since never. Brennan pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Yeah, it's Mike. Listen, we Got a situation here. Old black guy, Earl Thompson. Yeah, the one from the shelter. There's something off about his records. Sealed federal file. Can you look into it? He listened for a moment. Then his face changed. Special forces? Are you sure? Another pause. Whistleblower. What kind of? He glanced at Russo. Yeah, we'll keep an eye on him. Close eye. Thanks. He hung up and turned to his partner. We might have a problem. Miles away, in a dimly lit parking lot behind an abandoned warehouse, Earl stood beside a rental car, waiting. At exactly 9 o'clock, headlights appeared, and a Lincoln Town car pulled up beside him. Major Robert Danielson stepped out, 63 years old, silver-haired, still carrying himself like he was in uniform despite his civilian clothes. Earl, he said, clasping his old friend's hand firmly. It's starting, isn't it? Started this morning, Earl confirmed. They're getting bolder, more open with it. The list. Earl pulled out a small notebook from his jacket. 2 cops, confirmed. The diner owner's connected to the money laundering, though she might not know it. Her cousin in the city council is definitely aware. And there's more. Danielson studied the names. This is bigger than we thought. It always is. Earl looked back toward town, where the lights of Main Street glowed in the distance. They made a mistake today, Robert. They showed their hand, thinking I was just some old homeless vet they could humiliate for sport. And Miss Williams? Earl's expression softened slightly. She's a good kid. Reminds me of my daughter before. He didn't finish the sentence. She's got nothing to do with this. But she's involved now. They saw her talk to you. I know. We need to move fast before they realize what's happening. From across the street, hidden in the shadows of a closed storefront, Maya watched the 2 men talk. She'd followed Earl after her shift, driven by curiosity and concern. She couldn't hear their words, but she could see the way they stood, the way they moved. These weren't broken old men. These were soldiers, planning something. That Earl's head turned slightly, and for a moment Maya was sure he'd spotted her. But he said nothing, returning to his conversation. 20 minutes later, the men parted ways, and Earl began his walk back to the shelter. Maya waited until both cars were gone before emerging from her hiding spot. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than a dirty glass of water. And somehow, she knew her life had just become far more complicated. That night, Earl sat on his cot in the shelter, the metal box from his duffel bag open on his lap. Inside were his real treasures: a bronze star, a purple heart, photographs of soldiers whose names he still whispered in his dreams, and a thick manila envelope labeled Operation Red Sand in faded ink. He pulled out the flip phone and scrolled through his contacts. 15 names, all fellow veterans, all men and women who'd been pushed aside, forgotten, or silenced. He selected a group message and typed slowly with his thumbs. Tomorrow, the reckoning begins. Within minutes, responses came back. Simple confirmations, but Earl knew each one represented someone ready to stand up, to push back against the corruption that had taken root in this small town like a cancer. He looked out the shelter window, at the stars barely visible through the light pollution, and whispered to himself, they wanted a war. They should have been more careful what they wished for. The diner had been closed for 2 hours, but Shelby's car was still in the parking lot. Inside, she sat with Brennan and Russo, plus her cousin Tommy from the city council, and Bill Morrison, who owned the diner but rarely showed his face. He knows something, Brennan was saying. The feds have a file on him we can't access. So, Shelby said, he's still just some old bum. Who's going to believe him over us? You don't get it, Morrison said, his voice tight with worry. If he's connected to the feds, if he's here for a reason, then we deal with it, Tommy said firmly. Like we always do. This is our town. We decide who stays and who goes. And if he doesn't go quietly? Russo asked. Tommy smiled coldly. Then he goes another way. Accidents happen. Old men fall down. Bodies are fragile at that age. Shelby laughed, but it sounded forced even to her. You're being paranoid. He's nothing. Nobody. I proved that today. But as they sat in the dark diner, planning their next moves, none of them noticed the small device attached to the underside of their table, its red light blinking steadily as it recorded every word. The recording device under the diner table had captured everything from the night before, and by dawn, Earl had already listened to the conversation twice. He sat in the shelter's common area, earbuds in, the flip phone playing back Tommy's cold words about accidents and old men falling down. Earl's expression remained neutral, but his fingers drummed against his knee in a rhythm that would have been familiar to anyone who'd served under him. The pattern he tapped when formulating strategy. Morning brought the usual bustle to Maggie's place, but there was an edge to it. Shelby moved through her stations with extra energy, her voice a little too loud, her laugh a little too sharp. She was performing confidence, trying to convince herself that yesterday's victory over Earl meant something. "Did you see him yesterday?" she announced to a table of regulars, the Johnson family who came in every Thursday. Just sat there staring at that glass like it was going to magically turn into champagne. These people, I swear, they expect something. For nothing. Mrs. Johnson shifted uncomfortably, pushing eggs around her plate. Her husband buried himself deeper in his newspaper. Their teenage daughter, Rebecca, looked up from her phone with disgust. "That was really mean, what you did," Rebecca said. "Rebecca," her mother hissed. "What?" "It was. He's a person. He just wanted water." Shelby's smile turned brittle. "Sweet little girl. When you're older, you'll understand that some people need to learn their place." "His place?" Rebecca's voice rose. "What century do you think this is?" "Rebecca, enough," Mr. Johnson said firmly, but his eyes met Shelby's with something that wasn't quite approval. The bell above the door chimed, and everyone turned to look. A sleek black SUV had parked outside, government plates visible through the window. Two men emerged, different from yesterday's visitors, but cut from the same cloth. Dark suits, purposeful stride, and that particular bearing that screamed federal authority. They didn't come into the diner. Instead, they walked straight to the library. Earl was expecting them. He'd positioned himself at a table near the front windows where he could be easily found, but also where their meeting would be visible to anyone watching from the street. Public meetings were harder to misinterpret, harder to disappear. "Colonel Thompson," the lead agent said, taking a seat across from him. "Agent David Park, FBI. This is Agent Johnson." Earl nodded, noting that Park had Korean features and spoke with a slight southern accent. Alabama, maybe Georgia. Johnson was younger, nervous, probably his first major assignment. "Gentlemen," Earl said calmly, "how can I help you?" "We've been monitoring the situation here," Park said, keeping his voice low enough that the librarian couldn't hear. "Your reports have been illuminating, but incomplete," Earl said. "It wasn't a question. We need more. The recording from last night is good, but threats made in anger aren't enough. We need financial records, documented patterns of discrimination, evidence of the money laundering you mentioned." Earl pulled out a small notebook, sliding it across the table. "Badge numbers, dates, times. Every incident of police harassment against minorities in this town for the past 3 years. Cross-reference these with the arrest records, and you'll find a pattern. Charges dropped after payments to certain accounts." Johnson started photographing the pages with his phone while Park continued. "The diner. Health code violations are the least of it. Check the employee records. You'll find social security numbers that don't match, wages paid under the table, and approximately $30,000 a month flowing through that shouldn't be there. How do you know about the money?" Earl's slight smile was answer enough. Park understood. Earl had sources, methods, connections from his past life that he wouldn't reveal even to the FBI. "We're going to need you to be more visible," Park said. "Draw them out. Make them escalate. They're already planning to. I'll be having lunch there today. That could be dangerous." "Agent Park, I survived 3 tours in Vietnam and a decade fighting corruption in the Pentagon. I think I can handle small-town bullies." From across the street, Maya watched the meeting through the diner window during her break. She'd been documenting everything she could, taking photos of health violations with her phone, keeping notes of Shelby's comments, recording dates and times when the cops came in for their free meals that never appeared on any check. "Spying now." Shelby's voice made Maya jump. "Just getting some air," Maya said, turning away from the window. "Those look like feds over there," Shelby said, her eyes narrowing as she studied the library. "Your friend Earl's got some interesting visitors." "I wouldn't know." Shelby grabbed Maya's arm, her nails digging in slightly. "Listen carefully, girl. There's a health inspector coming this afternoon. Routine check. Everything needs to be perfect. And if your friend over there had anything to do with calling them, you're hurting me," Maya said quietly. Shelby released Herbert leaned in close. Not as much as I could. Remember that. Back in the library, the agents were preparing to leave when Agent Park asked one final question. Colonel, why here? Why this town? Earl was quiet for a long moment. My daughter lived here once. Before she died, she wrote me letters about this place, about how it could be beautiful if people would just let it. She was an idealist. His voice grew harder. They ran her out of town for dating someone they didn't approve of. She died in a car accident 3 months later, trying to get back to see him one last time. I'm sorry, Park said. Don't be sorry. Help me clean it up. It's what she would have wanted. After the agents left, Earl made his own preparations. He pulled out his flip phone and sent another group message. Phase 2. 1,300 hours. At exactly 1 o'clock, Earl entered Maggie's place. But he wasn't alone. Behind him came 5 other veterans, 3 black, 1 Hispanic, 1 Asian. All were clean, neatly dressed, and carried themselves with military precision. They took a table in the center of the diner, impossible to ignore. Shelby stood frozen behind the counter. The lunch crowd was bigger than usual, and now she had 6 veterans sitting in prime position, waiting to be served. I've got this, Maya said, grabbing menus before Shelby could react. Good afternoon, gentlemen, Maya said warmly, distributing the menus. Can I start you with some drinks? Water would be fine, Earl said, meeting her eyes with a slight smile. Clean glasses if it's not too much trouble. Of course. As Maya walked away, one of the other veterans, a man with a prosthetic leg visible below his shorts, spoke loud enough for the diner to hear. Nice place, Earl. Reminds me of that cafe in Saigon, before the siege. That was a lifetime ago. Marcus, Earl replied. Still remember you pulling me out when the mortars hit, Marcus continued. Lost the leg but kept my life, thanks to you. The diner had gone quiet. People were listening now, really listening. Shelby appeared with a notepad. Her face flushed. What can I get you? 6 lunch specials, Earl said politely. And could you make sure the cook knows about food allergies? My friend Chun here has a severe peanut allergy. We don't serve peanuts, Shelby said through gritted teeth. Good to know. Oh, and separate checks, please. We'll all be paying. It was a perfect trap. 6 paying customers, all veterans, all minorities, in full view of a packed restaurant. Shelby couldn't refuse service without making a scene, couldn't give them dirty glasses without witnesses, couldn't do any of her usual tricks. The cops came. In 20 minutes later, Brennan and Russo in full uniform, their faces darkening when they saw Earl's table. Well, Brennan said loudly. Looks like we've got a regular convention here. Veterans lunch, Earl said mildly. We served so people like you could eat in peace. Seems only fair we get the same courtesy. Russo's hand moved to his belt, not to his gun, but to his cuffs, a subtle threat. You boys have your paperwork? Need to make sure everyone's who they say they are. Officer Russo, Earl said, reading his nameplate deliberately. Are you asking for our identification because we've committed a crime, or because of how we look? Routine check, Brennan said. Interesting. Earl pulled out his phone, not the flip phone, but a smartphone Maya hadn't seen before. Because I'm recording this interaction, and I'd hate for it to appear that the Millfield Police Department profiles veterans based on race. The cops exchanged glances. Around them, other diners had pulled out their phones too. Rebecca Johnson was already live streaming. Enjoy your lunch, Brennan said finally. The words like broken glass in his mouth. They left. Russo muttered to Brennan, loud enough for Earl to hear. This isn't over. No, Earl agreed quietly. It's just beginning. The health inspector arrived at 2:30, a thin man with thick glasses and a clipboard that he held like a shield. Shelby met him at the door with her biggest smile. Mr. Patterson, we weren't expecting you until next month. Schedule changed, Patterson said, not returning her smile. I'll need to see your kitchen, storage areas, and employee hygiene stations. Of course, right this way. But Patterson wasn't doing a routine inspection. He'd received an anonymous tip with very specific allegations, complete with photographic evidence. He went straight to the problem areas. The refrigerator with the broken seal, the mouse droppings behind the stove that hadn't been cleaned in months, the expired milk being served to customers. This is unacceptable, he said, making notes rapidly. The cross-contamination alone could cause serious illness. We'll fix it right away, Shelby promised. You'll need to. I'm issuing a warning. Next violation, and you're shut down. Shelby's eyes found Earl, still sitting with his fellow veterans, and her look could have curdled fresh milk. He met her gaze calmly, raising his water glass. Crystal. Clear water in a clean glass, in a small toast. The warning from the health inspector should have been Shelby's wake-up call, but instead, it pushed her deeper into her anger. That evening, she sat in her cousin Tommy's office at City Hall, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. He's destroying everything, she ranted. That old bastard is trying to ruin us. Tommy Sullivan, 15 years on the city council and dirty for 10 of them, leaned back in his leather chair. He was everything small-town corruption looked like, soft around the middle, expensive watch that didn't match his city salary, and eyes that calculated the price of everything and the value of nothing. Calm down, he said. One health warning isn't the end of the world. You don't get it. Shelby slammed her hands on his desk. He had feds at the library. FBI, Tommy. What if they're investigating the money? That got his attention. Tommy sat up straighter, his casual demeanor evaporating. What money? Don't play dumb. Bill's been washing cash through the diner for 2 years. Your cash, from those construction contracts that don't exist. Keep your voice down. Tommy hissed, glancing at the door. How much do they know? I don't know, but Earl's not just some homeless vet. Brennan ran his record, sealed federal files. And today he had 5 other vets with him, all acted like he was some kind of hero. Tommy pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. I know someone in the state police. Someone who owes me. Maybe it's time Earl had a real problem, not just hurt feelings. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching the mood that had settled over the town. Earl woke to find a notice slipped under the shelter door. He was being evicted. No reason given, just 24 hours to vacate. This is illegal, said James Winters, another shelter resident and former attorney who'd lost everything to alcoholism but still knew the law. They need cause, proper notice period. They don't care about legal, Earl said, folding the notice. Carefully. This is about sending a message. He walked to the library, where Maya was waiting for him. She'd called in sick to the diner, unable to stomach another day of Shelby's presence. I've been documenting everything, she said, showing him a folder thick with photos and notes. Health violations, racist comments, the cops taking free meals. 3 years of evidence. You've been doing this for 3 years. No, but I talked to former employees. Shelby's run off 6 servers in 3 years, all minorities or people who wouldn't play along. I got their statements. Earl studied her with new respect. This is dangerous, what you're doing. So is doing nothing, Maya replied. My mother didn't raise me to look away when people are being hurt. Before Earl could respond, the library door burst open. Officers Brennan and Russo entered, hands on their weapons. Earl Thompson, you need to come with us, Brennan announced. On what charge? Suspicious behavior, potential vagrancy, disturbing the peace. In a library, Earl's voice was mild, but Maya could see his body tense, ready. Just come quietly. Old man. Earl stood slowly, hands visible. I assume you have a warrant? Don't need one. Reasonable suspicion. Of what? Reading while black. Russo stepped forward aggressively, but stopped when he noticed everyone in the library had their phones out, recording. Fine, Brennan said, but we'll be watching you. One wrong move, and what? A new voice interrupted. Everyone turned to see an elderly white man in an expensive suit standing in the doorway. Judge Harold Price, retired but still commanding respect, walked in with the aid of a mahogany cane. Officers, are you harassing this man without cause? Judge Price, Brennan said, his bravado deflating. We were just leaving. You were just leaving. Price's voice brooked no argument. Unless you have an actual warrant or probable cause that would stand up in court. The cops exchanged frustrated glances and left, but Russo turned at the door. This isn't over, Thompson. After they gone, Price approached Earl, extending his hand. Colonel Thompson, I never thought I'd see you again. Judge. Earl shook his hand firmly. It's been what, 15 years? Since the Pentagon hearings. You testified about the supply chain corruption. Cost you everything, if I recall. It was worth it. Soldiers were dying from faulty equipment while contractors got rich. Price turned to Maya. Young lady, you should know you're in the presence of a genuine hero. This man saved more lives by speaking truth to power than most save in combat. Why didn't you ever come forward before? Maya asked Earl. Let people know who you really are. Because that's not who I am anymore, Earl said quietly. That man had a career, a family, a purpose. I'm just Earl now. No, Price said firmly. You're still the same man who stood up when it mattered. And from what I hear, you're doing it again. That afternoon, Earl received a call on his flip phone. It was Major Danielson. We have a problem, Danielson said without preamble. Someone leaked your location to the wrong people. Not the locals, higher up. People who still have grudges from Operation Red Sand. How long do I have? Unknown. But Earl, maybe it's time to go loud. If you're exposed anyway, use it. Earl considered this. The veterans' banquet this weekend. They've invited me to speak. Perfect. Full disclosure. Everything. Red Sand, the corruption, all of it. That'll paint a target on your back. There's already one there. Might as well make it count. That evening, Shelby made her biggest mistake. Frustrated by the day's events, she went on Facebook and posted a rant that would seal her fate. So tired of certain people thinking they can come into our town and change everything. That old veteran everyone's feeling sorry for? He's a con artist. Probably never served a day in his life. Just another welfare leech playing victim. And anyone who supports him is a traitor to this community. Within an hour, the post had been shared dozens of times. Veterans groups picked it up. Someone found Earl's service record, the parts that weren't classified, and posted it in response. Bronze Star. Purple Heart. 30 years of service. The backlash was swift and brutal. Maya screenshot everything before Shelby could delete it. She also recorded the voicemail Shelby left her. You little bitch, I know you're helping him. You're fired. And if I see you near my diner again, you'll regret it. But the most damaging response came from an unexpected source. Bill Morrison, the diner's owner, had been monitoring the situation from his home in the state capital. He saw the writing on the wall and decided to cut his losses that he called Tommy Sullivan. We're done. I'm pulling out. You can't just watch me. That diner's becoming a liability. The feds are sniffing around, and I'm not going to prison for your cousin's big mouth. What about the money? What money? I don't know what you're talking about. Morrison hung up. Tommy immediately called Brennan and Russo to his office. We have a situation, he said. Morrison's out. If the feds get to him, he'll flip. So what do we do? Brennan asked. Earl Thompson needs to disappear. Not dead. That'd bring more heat. But discredited, broken, gone. How? Tommy smiled coldly. Plant something on him. Drugs, stolen goods, something that'll stick. Do it tonight, while everyone's focused on that Facebook drama. But they'd underestimated Earl. He'd been in enough battles to know when the enemy was desperate, and desperate enemies made mistakes. He made his own call to Agent Park. They're going to move tonight. Are you ready? We've got surveillance on all the principals. If they try anything, we'll know. Good. Because tomorrow, I'm going to light a fire they can't put out. That night, while Brennan and Russo tried to break into Earl's room at the shelter, they found FBI agents waiting for them. The arrest was quiet, professional, and devastating. The drugs they'd brought to plant were found on them instead, along with recordings of their conspiracy discussions. Tommy Sullivan was arrested at his home, trying to shred documents that had already been photographed by federal agents. And at Maggie's place, Shelby stood in the empty diner, finally understanding that her little kingdom of cruelty was crumbling around her. Maya found Earl at the library. The next morning, surrounded by reporters who'd gotten wind of the story, he looked tired but satisfied. It's not over, he told her. The diner will probably close. The town needs to heal. But the cancer's been cut out. What about you? Will you stay? Earl looked out the window at Main Street, where people were already gathering to support him, veterans and civilians alike. My daughter would have wanted me to stay and help rebuild. Make this the town she believed it could be. And the corruption? The money laundering? The FBI will handle that. My job was just to shine a light in the dark corners. He smiled. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person willing to stand up and say no more. As if to punctuate his words, a new notice appeared on the diner's door. Closed by order of the health department. Pending investigation. The revolution hadn't come with violence or grand gestures. It had come with dignity, persistence, and the quiet courage of people who refused to look away from injustice. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. That afternoon, Earl received another call, this one from a number he didn't recognize. Colonel Thompson, this is Secretary Madison from the Department of Defense. We've been monitoring the situation. It's time to have a conversation about restoring your record and your pension, and perhaps discussing a new role in rooting out corruption in other communities. Earl looked at Maya, who was listening with wide eyes. I'll think about it, he said. But first, I have a banquet to attend. There's a story that needs telling. The morning after the arrests, Main Street felt different. The news had spread through town like wildfire. 2 police officers and a city councilman arrested by the FBI. Maggie's place shut down by the health department. And at the center of it all, Earl Thompson, the man everyone had dismissed as just another homeless veteran. Earl sat in the library, but this time he wasn't alone. The table around him was crowded with documents, laptops, and people. Agent Park was there, along with a federal prosecutor named Jennifer Hartley who'd driven down from the state capitol. Maya sat to his right, her folder of evidence now part of an official federal investigation. Judge Price occupied the chair. To his left, having volunteered his legal expertise that on the wall-mounted television, a news segment was playing. The anchor, a polished woman with perfect hair, was saying, in a stunning development, the small town of Millfield has become the center of a federal investigation into police corruption and money laundering. At the heart of the story is Earl Thompson, a decorated veteran who exposed similar corruption in the Pentagon decades ago. They're making you famous, Maya said to Earl. Fame was never the goal, Earl replied, his eyes still on the documents before him. Justices. Agent Park's phone buzzed. He answered, listened, then looked at Earl. Bill Morrison wants to make a deal. Full cooperation in exchange for immunity. He won't get immunity, Prosecutor Hartley said firmly. But we might consider reduced charges if his information is valuable enough. It will be, Earl said. Morrison knows where all the bodies are buried. He's been washing money through that diner for years, but it goes deeper. Construction contracts, city maintenance funds, even school district money. How do you know all this? Hartley asked. Earl pulled out a small USB drive from his pocket. 3 months of surveillance. Audio recordings, financial transactions, everything. 3 months. Park's eyebrows rose. You've been investigating this for 3 months. Longer. But I needed concrete evidence before moving. Earl turned to Maya. Your documentation was the final piece. It showed the pattern of discrimination that made the federal civil rights violation clear. Without that, this would have just been about money. Outside, Shelby Morgan sat in her car, watching the library through red-rimmed eyes. She'd been up all night, fielding calls from reporters, former employees, and angry customers. Her Facebook post had been screenshot and shared thousands of times. Veterans organizations were calling for boycotts. Her own family was distancing themselves. Her phone rang. Bill Morrison. You stupid, stupid woman, he said without preamble. Do you have any idea what you've done? I didn't. You put everything in writing. You threatened people on voicemail. You gave them everything they needed. You're the one who was laundering money, and I was smart enough to keep my mouth shut about it. You had to make it personal. You had to humiliate that old man. He's just a nobody. Morrison laughed bitterly. That nobody is Colonel Earl Thompson. Distinguished Service Cross, Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart twice over. He exposed a conspiracy that went all the way to the Joint Chiefs. He took down 3 generals and a dozen defense contractors. And you thought you could serve him, dirty water, and get away with it. The line went dead. Shelby threw her phone against the dashboard, cracking the screen. She looked back at the library, where Earl was visible through the window, surrounded by federal agents and respect. Inside, Major Danielson had arrived, bringing with him a box of files. Operation Red Sand, he announced, setting the box on the table. Declassified as of this morning, by order of the Secretary of Defense. Earl's face went very still. All of it. Everything. The arms dealing, the dead soldiers, the cover-up. The people who destroyed your career because you wouldn't stay quiet. Most of them are dead or in prison now. It's time the world knows what really happened. Maya picked up one of the files, her eyes widening as she read. You saved an entire unit. 43 soldiers who would have died if you hadn't disobeyed direct orders. I did my job, Earl said quietly. You did more than that, Danielson corrected. You exposed a conspiracy that was selling defective body armor to our troops while selling the good stuff to private contractors. How many lives did that save? Not enough, Earl said, and for the first time, Maya saw real pain in his eyes. Never enough. Judge Price cleared his throat. Gentlemen, ladies, we have more pressing current matters. The state attorney general is coming this afternoon. She wants to expand the investigation statewide. Good, Parks said, because what we're finding here is just the tip of the iceberg. Morrison's already given us 3 other towns with similar operations. The door to the library opened, and Rebecca Johnson entered, the teenager from the diner who'd stood up to Shelby. She approached the table nervously. Mr. Thompson, I wanted to apologize for my family, for not saying something sooner. You did say something, Earl reminded her. That took courage. My grandfather wants to meet you. He says he served in Korea, and he's ashamed he didn't stand up for a fellow veteran. Earl stood and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Tell your grandfather that shame is only useful if it leads to change. He's welcome to come to the banquet Saturday. We'll talk. After Rebecca left, Maya asked, how do you do it? Stay so calm when people who should have helped you didn't. Because anger is exhausting, Earl said, and it doesn't change anything. Action changes things. Speaking truth changes things. Anger just burns you up from the inside. That afternoon, the state attorney general, Patricia Reeves, arrived with a full team. She was a formidable black woman in her 50s who'd made her career taking down corruption. Colonel Thompson, she said, shaking his hand firmly. I've been reading about you. The Pentagon, red sand, and now this. You have a talent for finding rot. Rot tends to find me, Earl replied. Well, I want to offer you a job. Official consultant to my office. Help us clean up the state. Earl glanced at Maya, then back to Reeves. I'll consider it. But first, we need to finish what we started here. Agreed. Now, tell me about the police department. For the next 2 hours, Earl laid out everything he'd discovered. It wasn't just Brennan and Russo. Half the force was taking bribes, looking the other way, or actively participating in the discrimination that kept the town segregated in all but name. We'll need to clean house, Reeves said. Bring in state police temporarily while we rebuild the department. The community won't trust outsiders, Judge Price warned. Then we'll need community oversight. Real oversight, not the rubber stamp committee they have now. Reeves turned to Maya. Miss Williams, would you consider being part of that committee? Maya's eyes widened. I'm not qualified. You documented abuse when no one else would. You stood up when it would have been easier to stay quiet. That's exactly the qualification we need. As the meeting continued, Shelby made one last desperate attempt to salvage something. She went to the local news station, agreeing to an on-camera interview. I'm being scapegoated, she told the reporter, tears streaming down her face. Yes, I made mistakes. But Earl Thompson is no saint. He's been lying about who he is, manipulating everyone. The reporter, a young man named David Chun, who'd done his homework, interrupted. Ms. Morgan, we verified Colonel Thompson's service record. Everything he's claimed is true. Do you have any evidence to support your accusations? He's got everyone fooled. Like this recording of you using racial slurs. Chun played audio from one of the many recordings Earl had gathered. Shelby's voice, clear and ugly, filled the studio. The interview ended with Shelby walking off the set. Saturday arrived with unexpected sunshine, as if the weather itself had decided to mark the occasion. The Veterans Banquet was being held at the American Legion Hall, a building that had seen better days but still stood proud on Oak Street. By noon, cars were already filling the parking lot. Earl stood in the shelter, looking at his army dress uniform laid out on the cot. He hadn't worn it in 15 years, hadn't been able to bear the weight of what it represented. But today felt different. You clean up nice, James Winters said from the doorway. The former attorney was sober for the first time in months, inspired by Earl's example. It still fits, Earl said with slight surprise, adjusting the ribbons on his chest. Those are some serious decorations. Earl touched the Distinguished Service Cross. Each one cost something. Some cost everything. A knock at the door interrupted them. Maya entered, dressed in a simple but elegant blue dress. The car's here, she said, then stopped, seeing Earl in uniform. Oh my, too much, Earl asked. No, perfect. They need to see who you really are. The ride to the Legion Hall was quiet. Earl stared out the window at the town passing by, the empty diner with its closed by health department sign, the police station with state police cars now parked outside, the library where everything had started to change. "You saved this town," Maya said. "No," Earl corrected. "I just held up a mirror. The town is saving itself." The Legion Hall was packed. Veterans from 3 counties had come, along with townspeople, reporters, and officials. At the head table sat Major Danielson, Judge Price, Attorney General Reeves, and an empty chair for Earl. But Earl didn't go to the head table immediately. Instead, he walked through the crowd, shaking hands, exchanging words with fellow veterans. He stopped at one table where an elderly white man sat with the Johnson family. "You must be Rebecca's grandfather," Earl said, extending his hand. The old man stood with difficulty, tears in his eyes. "Frank Johnson, Colonel, 1st Infantry Division, Korea." I'm sorry. I should have said something that day." "You're saying something now," Earl replied. "That's what matters." Finally, Earl made his way to the podium. The room fell silent. "My name is Earl Thompson," he began. "For the last several years, you've known me as the old man who stays at the shelter, who reads at the library, who walks your streets quietly. Today, I want to tell you who I really am and why I'm here." He pulled out a folder, the Operation Red Sand file. "In 1987, I was commanding a supply unit in a location I'm now free to tell you was Nicaragua. We were there unofficially, supporting operations that Congress had explicitly forbidden. I discovered that our suppliers were sending us defective equipment, body armor that wouldn't stop bullets, radio equipment that failed in the field, medical supplies that were expired or contaminated." The room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. "When I reported this, I was told to keep quiet. The suppliers had connections, people in high places who were getting rich. I was offered money, promotions, anything to stay silent." Earl's voice grew harder. "But I couldn't, because every piece of defective equipment meant soldiers dying. My soldiers, your sons and daughters." He opened the folder and pulled out photographs, young faces, smiling in uniform. These 12 soldiers died because their body armor failed. They were told they were protected. They weren't. He set the photos on the podium. "So I gathered evidence. I documented everything. And when my superiors tried to bury it, I went to Congress. The resulting investigation exposed a conspiracy that went to the highest levels of the military and defense contracting world. 3 generals court-martialed, 12 contractors prosecuted, hundreds of millions in fraudulent contracts canceled." Maya watched from her seat as the audience leaned forward, hanging on every word. "But speaking truth to power has a cost," Earl continued. "My career was destroyed. My wife was threatened. My daughter," his voice caught. "My daughter Sarah was harassed, followed, threatened. We had to relocate multiple times. The stress destroyed my marriage. Sarah tried to build a life here in Millfield 5 years ago, but when she dated someone certain people didn't approve of, a young black man named James, she was run out of town." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Several people looked ashamed. 3 months after leaving, Sarah died in a car accident. She was trying to come back to see James one last time. Earl's voice was steady now, but his hands gripped the podium. "I came here to understand what happened, to see the place that broke. My daughter's spirit. And what I found was a cancer of corruption and hatred that had infected this town." He looked directly at the camera recording for the news. "What happened at Maggie's place wasn't about a glass of water. It was about a system that decides who belongs and who doesn't, who matters and who's disposable. Shelby Morgan was just the visible symptom of a deeper disease. But here's what I also found." Earl's voice lifted. "I found Maya Williams, who risked her job to show kindness. I found Judge Price, who stood for justice even when it was uncomfortable. I found Rebecca Johnson, a teenager with more courage than adults 3 times her age. I found federal agents who still believe in doing the right thing." He pulled out another set of papers. "The investigation that started here has now spread to 6 towns. 14 arrests so far. Millions in stolen funds recovered. And it started because one young woman," he looked at Maya, "decided to document the truth." Someone started clapping. Then another. Soon the entire room was on its feet. Applause thundering through the old building. Earl raised his hand for quiet. "I'm not done. What happened here isn't unique to Millfield. It's happening in towns across America. Good people staying quiet while bad people take control. But it doesn't have to be that way. He pulled out his flip phone, the one everyone had seen him use. This phone has 15 contacts. All veterans like me who've been pushed aside, forgotten, dismissed. But we're organizing. We're watching. We're documenting. And we're not going to be silent anymore. The room erupted again. This time, Earl let them applaud. When it finally died down, he continued. The Attorney General has offered me a position, helping to clean up corruption statewide. I'm going to accept. But I'm also staying here in Millfield. This is where my daughter wanted to build a life. I'm going to help make it the town she believed it could be. He looked at the empty diner. Through the window. Maggie's place is closing permanently. Bill Morrison has agreed to sell the building as part of his plea agreement. I propose we turn it into something else. A community center where everyone is welcome. Where veterans can get services, where kids can do homework, where the town can come together instead of being divided. Mayor Patterson, who'd been notably absent during the corruption scandal but had somehow avoided prosecution, stood up. That's a beautiful idea, Colonel. But who's going to pay for it? Earl smiled. The Department of Defense has agreed to restore my back pay and pension from the last 15 years. Every penny of it will go toward the center. Additionally, the assets seized from the corruption investigation will be returned to the community. We have the money. We just need the will. Judge Price stood. I motion that the town council, what's left of it, vote on this proposal immediately. Second, called Frank Johnson. The vote was unanimous. The Banquet continued. Shelby Morgan sat in her apartment, watching the live stream on her laptop. She'd lost everything. Her job, her reputation, her friends. The federal prosecutor had informed her that while she wouldn't face criminal charges for the discrimination, she was being sued civilly by the ACLU. She'd likely lose everything she owned. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. It's never too late to change. E.T. She stared at the message, then at Earl on the screen, surrounded by respect and admiration. She started typing a response, deleted it, typed again, deleted again. Finally, she just wrote, I'm sorry. The response came quickly. Apology accepted. Now do better. Back at the banquet, Major Danielson was speaking. I've known Earl Thompson for 35 years. He's the most honest man I've ever met, and that honesty has cost him everything. But he never stopped fighting for what's right. He raised his glass to Colonel Earl Thompson and to the idea that one person standing up for justice can change everything. The toast was drunk, and Earl found himself surrounded by well-wishers. But his eyes found Maya in the crowd. None of this would have happened without you, he told her. You would have found another way, she replied. Perhaps, but you reminded me that the next generation is worth fighting for. Your mother would be proud. She is. She's watching the live stream. From her hospital bed, she says to tell you thank you. As the evening wound down, Earl stepped outside for air. The town looked the same, but felt different. The shadows seemed less dark, the future less certain but more hopeful. That a car pulled up, and Secretary Madison himself stepped out, full dress uniform gleaming with stars. Colonel, he said, saluting. Earl returned the salute, muscle memory taking over. I wanted to deliver this personally, Madison said, handing Earl an envelope. Your official restoration to full rank and honors. And something else. He handed Earl a second envelope. Inside was a photo, Sarah Thompson in her college graduation gown, smiling brilliantly. We found this in the Pentagon files. Thought you should have it. Earl's composure finally cracked. Tears ran down his weathered face as he looked at his daughter's picture. She would have been proud of you, sir, Madison said softly. I hope so, Earl whispered. I hope so. As Madison's car pulled away, Maya joined Earl outside. What now? She asked. Earl looked at the empty diner, at the town spreading out before them, at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Now we rebuild. Not just buildings, but trust, community, hope. He smiled at her. Want to help? I already am, Maya said. I start law school next month. The Attorney General's office is paying for it, with the understanding I'll work for them after graduation. That's wonderful. Earl's smile was genuine, transforming his face. I learned from you that documenting injustice isn't enough. You have to know how to fight it legally. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the town settle into evening. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more corruption to expose, more battles to fight. But tonight, for just this moment, a small victory had been won. Inside the hall, someone had started singing, "God Bless America." Other voices joined in, veterans and civilians, black and white, young and old. The sound drifted out into the night, a promise of what the town could become. Earl and Maya walked back inside, rejoining the celebration. The revolution hadn't ended with the closing of a diner or the arrest of corrupt officials. It was just beginning, one changed heart at a time. And somewhere in the evening sky, Earl could almost feel Sarah smiling down, proud that her father had finally found his way home. Monday morning arrived with storm clouds that matched the mood on Main Street. The health inspector, Patterson, stood outside Maggie's place with two sheriff's deputies, not local cops, but county officers brought in after the arrests. The final closure notice was being posted on the door, bright orange against the faded paint. Inside, Shelby Morgan was having a complete meltdown. "You can't do this," she screamed at Patterson through the locked glass door. "This is my life, my livelihood. Ms. Morgan, you need to open this door." Deputy Harrison called out, his hand resting on his service weapon. "We have a court order." The small crowd that had gathered included Maya, who was documenting everything with her phone, and several former employees who'd come to witness the final act of Shelby's reign. "This is all his fault." Shelby pointed wildly at Earl, who stood across the street with Judge Price and Attorney General Reeves. "That man destroyed everything." Patterson spoke into his radio. "We're going to need the locksmith." But Shelby suddenly yanked the door open, her face red and tear-streaked. "Fine. Come in. See what you've done. You've destroyed a 43-year-old institution." Patterson entered with the deputies, followed by a team of health department officials. What they found inside was worse than the initial inspection had revealed. In her panic over the weekend, Shelby had tried to clean, but had only made things worse. Bleach mixed with ammonia created toxic fumes. Food had been left out and was rotting. The walk-in freezer had been unplugged, apparently by accident, and everything inside was spoiled. "This is a public health emergency," Patterson announced. "Everyone out. We need hazmat." Shelby stumbled out onto the sidewalk, where the crowd had grown larger. Someone started live streaming as she stood there, mascara running down her face, her carefully constructed world in ruins. "You think you've won?" she shouted at Earl across the street. "You think you're some kind of hero? You're nothing. A nobody who destroyed honest people's lives." Earl started to cross the street, and everyone tensed. Judge Price grabbed his arm, but Earl gently shook him off that he walked directly to Shelby, stopping just a few feet away. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but carried clearly. "Guess the filth's not in the glass anymore, Ms. Morgan. It never was." The callback to that first insult landed like a physical blow. Shelby's face crumpled completely. "I'm ruined," she whispered. "Completely ruined." "No," Earl said, his voice gentler now. "You're at a crossroads. What you do next defines who you really are. You can keep blaming everyone else, or you can look in the mirror and start changing what you see." Before Shelby could respond, a news van pulled up. David Chin jumped out with his cameraman. "Ms. Morgan, do you have any comment on the federal investigation? What about the allegations of systemic racism?" Shelby looked at the camera, then at Earl, then back at the camera. For a moment, it seemed like she might say something, maybe even apologize. But then her face hardened. "I want my lawyer," she said, pushing past Chun and fleeing to her car. That afternoon, the real bombshell dropped. Bill Morrison, sitting in a federal facility, had started talking. And he had receipts, literal receipts, documents, recorded conversations. The corruption went deeper than anyone had imagined. Agent Park called Earl with updates. "Morrison's given us 12 names. City planning, the school board, even someone in the state legislature. They were using multiple businesses to wash money, not just the diner." "Who in the legislature?" Earl asked. "Senator Richard Blackwood." Ring any bells? Earl's silence was telling. Blackwood had been one of the officials who tried to bury the Operation Red Sand investigation decades ago. "It's all connected," Earl said finally. "These people, they're like cancer cells. You think you've cut them out, but they just metastasize somewhere else." "Well, we're going for the whole tumor this time," Park promised. At the police station, now staffed entirely by state officers, The evidence room was being cataloged. What they found there was damning: drugs that should have been destroyed, money that was never logged, and weapons that had disappeared. From evidence, Captain Sarah Mitchell from the state police, a tall black woman with 20 years of experience cleaning up corrupt departments, addressed the town council that evening. Ladies and gentlemen, what we've uncovered here is systematic criminal enterprise operating under color of law. Officers Brennan and Russo were just the tip of the iceberg. We've now identified 8 officers involved in criminal activity, from evidence tampering to extortion. Frank Johnson, Rebecca's grandfather, stood up. 8 out of 12 officers? How did we let this happen? By looking away, Captain Mitchell said bluntly. By accepting that certain people got treated differently. By saying that's just how things are instead of demanding better. Earl stood up. Captain Mitchell is right. But pointing fingers at the past won't fix the future. We need to focus on rebuilding. I propose a community policing board with real oversight powers, civilian review of all complaints, and mandatory bias training for every officer. Who's going to pay for all that? Mayor Patterson asked, still trying to salvage some authority. The seized assets from the corruption investigation. Attorney General Reeves interjected. The federal government will be returning over $3 million to this community. More than enough to rebuild the police department properly. The meeting continued late into the evening, with heated debates and difficult admissions. But by the end, a plan was forming. The town would not just recover, but transform. Meanwhile, at the county jail, Brennan and Russo sat in separate cells, their careers and freedom gone. Brennan was trying to make a deal, offering to testify against Tommy Sullivan and others. Russo had lawyered up and wasn't talking. Tommy Sullivan himself was in federal custody, and his lawyer was trying to negotiate a plea deal. But the evidence Earl had gathered was so comprehensive that the prosecutor barely needed his cooperation. That night, Maya visited her mother in the hospital, bringing good news. I got the scholarship, she said, holding the acceptance letter. Full ride to law school, plus a stipend for living expenses. Her mother, Linda Williams, weak from her latest lupus flare, but smiling, squeezed her hand. I'm so proud of you, baby. You stood up when it mattered. I learned from you, Mama. You always taught me to do what's right, even when it's hard. Is Mr. Thompson really a colonel? Linda asked. He is. A decorated war hero who gave up everything to expose corruption. Just like he's doing now. We need more people like him. We need to be more like him, Maya corrected. He showed me that. One person really can make a difference. Tuesday morning brought more revelations. The FBI had arrested Senator Blackwood at his home in the state capitol. The image of him being led away in handcuffs made the national news. Earl watched from the library, surrounded by veterans who'd come to town to support him. His network of 15 had grown to 50, all committed to watching for and reporting corruption in their communities. Major Danielson sat beside him. You started something, Earl. This is spreading beyond Millfield. Good. It needs to. Are you ready for Saturday? Saturday would be the grand reopening, not of the diner, but of the building as the Thompson Community Center, named after Sarah Thompson, not Earl. He'd insisted on that. I'm ready, Earl said. Sarah would have loved this. A place where everyone belongs. Wednesday's town council meeting was standing room only. Shelby Morgan was there, sitting in the back, trying to be invisible. When the public comment period opened, she stood up. I want to speak, she said, her voice shaking. The room went silent. Earl turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. Shelby started, then stopped. Started again. I was wrong. About everything. I was raised to believe certain things. About certain people, and I never questioned it. I let fear and hatred guide me, and I hurt people. Good people. She looked directly at Earl. Mr. Thompson, Colonel Thompson, I'm sorry. Not just for the water, but for everything. For the culture I helped create. For the people I drove away. For your daughter. Gasps rippled through the room. Few people had known Shelby was one of the people who'd harassed Sarah Thompson. I can't undo what I did, Shelby continued. But I want to help fix it. I'm donating my savings, it's not much, about $10,000, to the community center. And I'm volunteering to help with the renovation, if you'll let me. The room erupted in discussion. Some people shouted that it was too little, too late. Others argued for forgiveness. Earl stood up, and the room quieted. Ms. Morgan, he said formally. Your apology is accepted. Your donation is appreciated. As for volunteering, he paused, and everyone held their breath. Redemption isn't given. It's earned. Day by day, choice by choice. If you're serious about changing, then yes, you can help. But the first time you show any of your old behavior, you're gone. Understood? Yes, sir, Shelby said, tears streaming down her face. Thank you. Thursday brought a surprise visitor. James Washington, the young black man Sarah Thompson had dated, arrived in town. He was now a successful attorney in Chicago. Having channeled his grief over Sarah's death into pursuing justice through law, he found Earl at the cemetery, standing at a small headstone that read, Sarah Marie Thompson, beloved daughter, 1990 to 2019. She talked about you all the time, James said, standing beside Earl. Said you were her hero. I failed her, Earl said quietly. No, the system failed her. The town failed her. But you're fixing that now. James pulled out an envelope. I want to help. This is a check for $50,000. Sarah left me some money in her will, and I've done well. This is what she would want. Earl looked at the check, then at the young man his daughter had loved. You don't have to. Yes, I do. For her. For the kids growing up here who deserve better. For the next interracial couple who shouldn't have to run. They stood together in silence, two men connected by loss and love, watching the sun set over the cemetery. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself wanted to celebrate. The old diner building had been transformed in just a week, cleaned, painted, and refurbished by an army of volunteers. Where once a neon sign flickered Maggie's place, a new sign read Thompson Community Center, within memory of Sarah Thompson underneath. Earl stood outside in his dress. Uniform again, but this time he wasn't alone. 50 veterans flanked him, all in their dress uniforms, forming an honor guard. Maya stood with her mother, who'd been released from the hospital for the occasion. Judge Price was there with the new town council. Even Shelby Morgan was present, wearing work clothes, having spent the entire night helping with final preparations. Attorney General Reeves stepped up to the microphone that had been set up on a small platform. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today not just to open a building, but to close a chapter and begin a new one. The corruption that plagued this town has been exposed and excised. 23 individuals have been arrested across the state as a result of the investigation that started here. Justice has been served. She turned to Earl. But justice is only the beginning. Healing, rebuilding, moving forward, that's the hard work. And it starts today. Earl took the microphone. He looked out at the crowd, hundreds of people, black and white, young and old, rich and poor. A month ago, he began, I walked into that diner and was served dirty water in a filthy glass. It was meant to humiliate me, to remind me that I didn't belong. But what happened in that moment wasn't about me. It was about all of us, about what kind of community we want to be. He paused, his eyes finding Shelby in the crowd. She met his gaze steadily. My daughter Sarah believed this town could be a place where everyone belonged, where love wasn't limited by race or class, where children could grow up feeling safe and valued regardless of who they were. She died believing that, even after. This town broke her heart. Several people in the crowd were crying now. Today, we honor her memory not with words, but with action. This center will be a place where veterans can get help, where kids can do homework, where seniors can gather, where everyone is welcome. The crowd erupted in applause. Earl raised his hand for quiet. But I want to be clear about something. This isn't about me being a hero. Heroes are people like Maya Williams, who documented injustice when it was dangerous to do so. Heroes are Judge Price, who stood up when it was easier to sit down. Heroes are the FBI agents who pursued corruption wherever it led. Heroes are even people like Shelby Morgan, who found the courage to confront their own prejudice and try to change. Shelby broke down completely at that, sobbing into her hands. An elderly black woman nearby, Mrs. Washington, James's grandmother, put an arm around her. Change is hard, Earl continued. It's uncomfortable. It forces us to look at ourselves and admit we were wrong. But change is also hope. It's the promise that tomorrow can be better than today. He pulled out a large pair of scissors. I'm supposed to cut this ribbon and officially open the center. But I'm not going to do it alone. He called people up one by one. Maya, Judge Price, Rebecca Johnson, James Washington, even Shelby. Each took hold of the scissors together. On three, Earl said. 1, 2, 3. They cut the ribbon together, and the crowd surged forward to explore the news center. Inside, the transformation was complete. Where once there had been cracked vinyl booths, there were now comfortable seating areas. The old counter had been converted into a computer station with free internet access. The kitchen would serve free meals to anyone who needed them. Maya found Earl standing in what used to be the corner booth, the one where the important people used to sit. "You did it," she said. "We did it," he corrected. "And we're not done. This is just one town. There are thousands more with the same problems. So, what's next? You go to law school and become the attorney this state needs. I work with the Attorney General's office to root out corruption, and we keep fighting one battle at a time." And Shelby? They looked over at where Shelby was serving coffee to veterans, her movements careful, respectful, almost reverent. "People can change," Earl said. "Not all of them, not easily, but it's possible. She'll never fully atone for what she did to Sarah, but she can try to balance the scales going forward." As the day progressed, more people arrived. The governor made an appearance, praising Earl and the town for confronting its demons. The national media covered the story, with CNN calling it a blueprint for fighting small-town corruption. But the most meaningful moment came near the end of the day. An elderly black veteran in a wheelchair was brought in by his grandson. Earl recognized him immediately, Sergeant William Hayes, who'd served under him in Vietnam. "Colonel," Hayes said, saluting from his chair. Earl returned the salute, then knelt beside the wheelchair. "William, I thought you were in Atlanta. Saw you on the news. Had to come. Had to say thank you." "For what?" "For continuing the fight. For showing that old soldiers don't just fade away. They stand up when it matters." As evening approached, the crowd gradually thinned. The last to leave were the core group: Maya, Judge Price, Major Danielson, James Washington, and surprisingly, Shelby. They sat in the main room of the center, exhausted but satisfied. "So what really happens now?" James asked. "Can this town really change?" "It already has," Judge Price said. "The question is whether it can sustain that change." "That's up to them," Earl said. "We've given them the tools, the opportunity. They have to choose to use them." Shelby spoke up quietly. "I want to help make sure they do. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want to earn it. Every day." "Then you will," Earl said simply. As they prepared to leave, Maya's phone buzzed. It was a text from her mother, watching the news. "You changed the world today." She showed it to Earl, who smiled. "No, we just cleaned up one small corner of it. But that's how the world changes, one corner at a time." They walked out together into the evening. Main Street looked the same, but felt entirely different. The shadows that had hidden corruption and hatred were gone, replaced by the warm light spilling from the community center's windows. A month later, Earl sat in his new office at the Attorney General's building in the state capitol. On his desk were files from 6 different towns reporting similar patterns of corruption. His phone rang constantly with tips, leads, and requests for help. Maya was at law school, excelling in her classes and already making a name for herself. As someone who wouldn't back down from a fight, Shelby was working at the community center full-time, having been hired as an assistant coordinator. She faced hostility from some, forgiveness from others, but she showed up every day, doing the work. The FBI investigation had expanded to 3 states. 47 people had been arrested. Millions in stolen funds had been recovered. And in Millfield, something remarkable was happening. The town that had once been divided was learning to come together. Not perfectly, not without problems, but genuinely trying. Earl looked at the photo on his desk, Sarah in her graduation gown, smiling brilliantly. Next to it was a new photo from the community center opening, showing the diverse crowd all together. His phone rang. Attorney General Reeves. "Earl, we've got a situation in Riverside County. Suspicious pattern of foreclosures targeting elderly black homeowners." "I'll look into it," Earl said. "Thank you." "And Earl, what you started in Millfield, it's spreading. Other towns are setting up community oversight boards. Veterans groups are organizing to monitor corruption. You lit a fire. Fires can destroy or purify," Earl said. "Depends on how they're tended." After hanging up, Earl pulled out his flip phone and sent a message to his network, Riverside County. "Who's available?" Within minutes, 5 veterans had responded, ready to investigate. He looked one more time at Sarah's photo. We're not done. Baby girl. Not even close. The next morning's newspaper carried a simple headline. The revolution continues. How one glass of dirty water changed America. But Earl didn't see it. He was already on the road to Riverside County, ready for the next battle. Because justice, he'd learned, wasn't a destination, it was a journey. And sometimes, that journey began with something as simple as saying no to cruelty, standing up to corruption, and refusing to let dignity be destroyed. The diner was gone. But what had replaced it would last much longer. A community that had learned to see itself clearly and chosen to be better. Sometimes justice does take the long way around. But it gets there, one stand at a time, one voice at a time, one glass of clean water at a time. And in Millfield, it had finally arrived. What injustice have you witnessed in silence? And when will you find the courage to be the one who finally says no more? If this story moved you to think differently about standing up for what's right, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us that change begins with just one person refusing to look away.